So I have this burst blood vessel in my eye and I was waiting for it to go away, but it's been like 3 weeks now and it's still there, so I guess I'm just gonna do this video. Hi, I'm Dixie, and in my last video I shared the making and reveal of my Jo March Little Women inspired costume that I had been working on all last fall. But I decided to give the making of the bonnet its own video because the construction process was so long. To recap, this costume idea is based around the fall of 1867. Bonnets of 1867 were small, flat, and floofy. Their shape was a sharp opposite from the tall spoon bonnets from the earlier 1860s, and the transition from this to this happened quite quickly over the span of about 3 years. Refashioning an older bonnet might be an easier way for someone to keep up with fashion, especially if you're taking away volume from the hat and making it smaller rather than bigger. I talked about bonnet style evolution in this video where I introduced this project, and you'll remember that I didn't have a pattern for this style that I wanted to do, so I had to get creative. I did find this reprint of a pattern from 1868. The one available picture is helpful because it shows the base shape without any of the decorations. It's rounded and sits close to the head. But I didn't buy this pattern, so I can't say how good it is. Instead, I thought I could probably work this out myself. So I grabbed a bowl, which was the approximate size of my head, and I had some buckram, which is a loose weave cotton stiffed with glue that you can mold into a curved shape using steam. I highly recommend not doing what I'm doing here. Plastic can melt, a metal bowl would get really hot, glass can break. Hence why hat blocks are made of wood. But hat blocks are also really expensive and I can't justify spending that kind of money to make one bonnet. Once the buckram was pliable, I moved it to a wig form, which is styrofoam, which obviously you don't want to use steam on this. And this was the hard part, working out the shape. I wanted it to cover the crown of my head and come down to the top of my ears. It needs to be kind of flat on top and sit a little higher at the front of the head. Similar to some of these images. Once the buckram gets wet, the glue sticks to everything. This is the residue on my iron handle. After the form dried, I drew my cutting lines. And I am amazed that this actually worked. I wired the edges by hand. That will really help the bonnet to hold its shape. Then I covered the wire with bias tape, which helps protect the edge. Next, I wrapped the shape with muslin. This keeps the buckram from showing through the outer fabric and makes everything smooth. Now comes the fun part, decorating. I had several pieces of scrap fabric that could work for a bonnet. I knew I wanted something that coordinated with the dress but didn't match exactly. I also knew I wanted red ribbons because we know that Jo has red ribbons on at least one of her bonnets. This bronzy silk is left over from my 1840s ball gown, and I chose that for the base. It has red threads running in one direction and gold in the other. I tried gathering the smaller of the two ribbons for some decoration, but decided that I hated that look, so instead I pleated the ribbon. I also made some bias tape from the bronze silk because several of my inspiration bonnets used lines of ribbon or bias trim as detailing. Then I sprayed adhesive to add another layer of muslin to the interior. This stuff smells really strong, so make sure that you have an open window or a fan on. And I repeated the process for the silk lining. For the back, I'm going to cover the raw edge later, but for the front, I tucked the silk layer under and slip stitched it in place. I used more of that skinny ribbon to bind the back edge, and it looks a little lumpy, but it'll be covered again by the wider ribbon later. In the chapter Friend, which covers the publisher scene in New York, it says Jo had a bow in her bonnet. Now, that could mean the bow tied under her chin, but the word in makes me think it's a decorative bow somewhere on her head. So I'm adding a bow to the back of my bonnet with the wider ribbon, then using the tails as ties. For the inside of the brim, I was inspired by extant bonnets that often have some kind of trim peeking out. So I sewed this silk velvet, which was left over from one of my earliest costumes, into a long tube, and I whip gathered the edges to make this kind of spiral look and tacked that into the inside of the brim. This helps to hold the brim up above my hair a little bit, like in several of the extant examples. I do love how this bonnet turned out, but my only critique is that it's probably slightly too small for this era. It ought to be a little longer front to back, and this size works better for a few years later into the 1870s. But that's okay, because if I ever make an 1870s outfit, I'll already have a bonnet to go with it. I originally wasn't sure about pairing these fabrics together with the bright red ribbon, but I think it works nicely and contrasts well with my hair. And as a bonus, I got to use up more silk scraps. For a first attempt at doing molded buckram millinery, I'm very pleased, and every time I make a bonnet or a hat, I'm always itching to make more. Thank you so much for following along with me on this big project, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for subscribing, and until next time, happy hat making!